class. Welcome to week 11, I believe. Actually, it might be in week 12. I'm really sorry. But that actually leads me into the first thing I'm going to tell you, which is all of the weeks are up on Blackboard. So through the last class, you can see everything due each week and links for everything each week. Also in 2 weeks, you have your major paper due. So thank you to those who submitted drafts to me. They were really great. And so I'm excited to read all of yours. Your topics were really fantastic. And so Dr. Sanborn is excited too. He is out this week, so I am filling in with our Emerging Leaders panel here. So we are talking to you today about our experiences and really their experiences with my commentary here and there about how to lead from within an organization. So you heard earlier this semester from a Young Leaders panel of chief development officers and executive directors who were young, but this is really folks who are still, at the beginning, early part of their career, who may have been in nonprofits for, I think everyone here is about like 10 years-ish. So still starting off, I think, right? Like you still have decades more to go. And so just, but how they lead and what they admire in leaders in their experience. So thank y'all for being here today.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Let's start off with introductions. Andy, would you like to start off and tell us where you're from and a little bit about your job and what you do?
Sure. Well, I'm originally from Los Angeles, California. I am currently the director for the Center for Social Measurement and Evaluation at Children at Risk, where I oversee a lot of our data and research projects, which are used to help advance our advocacy efforts in 4 areas: public health, education, human trafficking, and parenting.
Bonnie.
I am Bonnie Schultz. I work right now for Baylor College of Medicine within the teen health clinics. I do a lot of education on safe sex, risk reduction. We educate on STDs and HIV prevention. We do birth control education and family planning.
Great, thanks.
I'm Chrystal Dorelien, and I am a program coordinator at Casa de Esperanza, and we're a foster care agency, and so I basically coordinate the foster care and the adoptions that we do at the agency.
Awesome, thank y'all again for being here. So our students just finished reading Jim Collins' book, Good to Great, and it's really all about how to bring an organization from good to great, as the title would imply. And so they are all learning in their weekly assignments and their assignments throughout the semester on how to be a good leader and how to meet various challenges and all the different leadership styles. Do y'all want to tell me about what you admire in a good leader, just from your experience at your current job or a past job?
Sure. Well, I went through a leadership class a while ago where a lot of the people that I work with internally in the organization and also externally took a survey on my leadership skills. And I was in a class with 40 other people, and we reviewed the results after. And there were maybe like 40 questions that people answered, and the 2 that this person who's been doing this for 30 years said were the most important were, does he or she treat people with respect, and does that person follow through on their commitments and promises? And so when I think about leaders that I admire, I think about one, people who are visionaries and who can inspire people towards their mission. And then 2, people who can actually roll up their sleeves and follow through on their promises and their commitments. And then number 3, I think people who are respectful. I think that that's something really critical. And so those are the things that I usually am drawn to in the leader.
And that's important in your last point about respect, because it's not just respectful to employees or those that you work with. It's respectful to competitive organizations and their leaders, or other people who may not be really always your allies.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Bonnie?
I think some qualities and skills that particularly stick out to me is the ability to be humble. Humility is a huge, I think, leadership skill to have, the ability to admit when you're wrong, to learn from other people, to know that you're not always the one who knows the most or has the best ideas, but you're willing to take from your team and learn from the people around you. And I think another quality would just be conviction, the ability to know what it is that you care about and to pursue that with a great passion.
That's great. How about you, Chrystal?
Well, I would agree with both Bonnie and Andy in those aspects, especially just having leaders who have been in the trenches themselves, so they have a better idea of what the people in the forefront are doing, and they can better lead them in what the mission is for their agency. Another thing too is for agencies to basically survive, they have to be willing to evolve in their ideas and just be willing to listen to others' ideas and just not be stuck in their own kind of, I don't know, like their own way of thinking with their organization, because that's the only way it'll grow is if they're willing to encompass other people's ideas.
That's a great point. And you work with, especially like in a very hard, emotionally difficult kind of job. I mean, you work with children in foster care and who have had very difficult situations. So I like your first point a lot about how like having leaders who have been there. So how do you see like that connecting specifically like at CASA? Have the leadership's folks been there and understand where you're coming from?
Well, yes. So our director who started CASA, I mean, she was one of the first people to take care of the kids herself. So she knows what it's like to care for the children. She's not just telling people what to do, but she was there doing it from the very beginning. And it just kind of grew that way, where a lot of the people who came up in leadership at the organization have been themselves caregivers, kind of starting in the trenches and working their way up.
That's great. So a lot of our students right now are in the nonprofit sector or want to be in the nonprofit sector. So can each of you tell me your experience from leading really within the organization and from where you're at?
So in our current role?
Or in a past role. I know you've only been in your current role for for like a month, maybe? Yeah.
Well, I think that working in the nonprofit space is really unique in that there's always room for leadership opportunity. And so I think that whether you're just starting your career, you're in the middle of your career, wherever you are, if you identify a problem and I also identify the solution and articulate a path forward to your manager, to the team, I think I've been in a lot of situations where there's always the opportunity to do that. And so I don't think that, from my experience, if I were advising someone, don't feel constrained to your title, to your years of experience. I think especially the nonprofit sector, there's always a lot of room for growth. And it seems like people are very open to leadership. And that's very unique as opposed to working probably in the private sector for a company where there's a very clear and very structured leadership and career path.
How about you, Bonnie?
I think as far as leading from within an organization, you have to be willing to see yourself as no better or different than the people around you. You have to be able to support and encourage the people that you're working with. I think working in nonprofits can often feel like a thankless job. It can feel like you're working these really long hours and you're never necessarily seeing the benefit of what it is that you're doing. And so it's very important to invest in the people around you, the people that are in the trenches with you. And although you may not have a title of leadership, the people who are supporting and encouraging each other, they're the ones who tend to rise to the top, because the more you support and encourage, the more you're going to be supported and encouraged. And I think that tends to be mutually beneficial when you're approaching it in that way.
That's a great point. How about you, Chrystal?
Yeah, I mean, that falls in line. It's teamwork. The main thing is just being able to work with your team, and like Bonnie said, it's like a natural thing where you just kind of rise as a leader, especially over time, when you put in all the time and the effort and the years with working with your team and the mission of your organization. It's just a natural progression.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. And the three of us, Bonnie and Chrystal and I, we became friends while we were earning our master's in social work, and we were in group projects all the time. They almost were like the death of us, but we did it, made it through. But I think, even though you may have like one person who really has the vision and is pushing you forward in a team environment, as people who are playing their roles and who are helping, like contributing to the ideas is also like a type of leadership, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely.
So as you are pursuing, different paths in your career and moving up, presumably, what kind of things do you work on for yourself, like to expand your horizons and skills as a leader?
Well, I always try to identify something that I don't know that I want to get better at, and that I want to continue to learn. So actually, in my previous job, a lot of what we did was data analysis. Now, my background is not necessarily in data analysis, but our director of analytics was very open to coaching me in how to do a lot of the work that she led in the organization. It was, and I became very interested in developing that skill set. And it was a win-win for the organization because I learned a new skill set that I was able to use to help push the work forward, and two, it increased our capacity. So I was able to do some of her work so she could focus on other things as well. So I think for me, it's always wherever I'm at, I always identify what's something that I don't know that I want to get better at, and how do I develop a relationship with someone in the organization who's an expert in that area, so I can continue to grow in my skill set and position myself to lead in that organization and also for the next role in the future.
So I really like the whole point about professional development, because Children at Risk just got wrapped up our 2-day strategic planning where we think about what's happening in the next year, 5 years, 10 years. And something that came up repeatedly from our staff was, we need more time to develop our skills professionally, because for this exact reason is that it's mutually beneficial to the individual who is, improving their skill set, but also to the organization which will be gaining, a better skills from this individual. So do you, like in the other nonprofits that you've worked at, have they made time for your professional development? I'd like to hear that from all of you.
I mean, yes, but I've worked in schools before, and I've worked in nonprofit organizations. And in the school setting, there's structured time. There's time set aside for that. It's sometimes mandated. I think a great school makes time for that. In the nonprofit world, I haven't really experienced that level of structure. So it's been incumbent upon me to create that structure for myself.
Yeah, I think I would definitely second that. I have been in the nonprofit sector for about 10 years, and I think I have found that if I want to do some sort of extended education or training, that I really have to seek it out myself. And working at Baylor now, I get inundated with emails for trainings and courses and things, but it's at times where I'm expected to also be at work, and so it's kind of like either go to the ones that are on Saturday or figure out something, because I'm also expected to be at work, and it's not really like, oh, you have this training, you can not cover a clinic for the day. So I do feel like I kind of have to, just work an extra day in the week, which is tough to do. And so I do wish that there was a little more support in that.
How about you?
Well, I agree. I mean, it's really hard to kind of have that worked in with nonprofit work. So you have to take the initiative to just do it on your own. And but I think that also kind of builds on your leadership skills. I mean, if you are that dedicated to growing as a leader, you'll find the time and make the effort to do that on your own.
Or advocate for yourself.
Right.
I mean, I think it's really interesting. I mean, actually, after hearing y'all's experiences, that Children at Risk does. Like, if there's something I want to go to for a lunch or an afternoon or a half day, like, the bosses will always be like, yes, if you don't have any meetings or other commitments, go. So that's a really interesting lesson. So back to the other question of how do you try to improve your leadership skills with where you're at?
I think it's interesting that Andy was saying like that you try to find things that you're not as good at and improve upon those, because I was thinking that for me it's important to acknowledge that I'm not always going to be the best at everything, you know, and that other people can be better than me at certain things, and to kind of embrace that about, especially in a team environment. Nonprofits often, you know, we're working together trying to accomplish a shared goal. And so acknowledging that I have certain strengths that other people don't have, and they have strengths that I don't have. And I think that for me, that's really important because I do like to be good at all of the things that I do. And so embracing that, you know, maybe I'm not going to be the best, but this person is really awesome at this. And so empowering that person to fill that role, and then allowing myself to take the roles where I do excel, and then, you know, ultimately reaching our goal, I feel like is, you know, works for me. So
I like that perspective. Yeah. How about you?
I mean, I would actually take a combination of the two. I know for me, it's more of like a self-inventory of what I'm good at and what I'm not so good at, and then looking at where I want to be. And so what are the things that I need to get to where I want to be, and if those things are limited, then I need to work on that.
Yeah.
So that's true.
All of y'all started off with the same thing, which was a self-assessment, basically, which is hard to do. I think, you know, in our Master's in Social Work program, it really like challenged us and taught us, you know, exactly, like, we had entire classes dedicated to discovering your value set, you know, and really identifying like who you are and what you value. And so, I mean, do y'all have any advice for our students and how they can really think critically about themselves, their skills, their values, and I don't know, maybe part of it is getting some feedback from people they trust?
Yeah, I mean, at one point in my career, I considered going to business school for a lot of different reasons, and one of the schools I visited was Stanford, and their essay question is, what is the most important thing to you and why? And so it really just, I think that was a really good exercise for whether you apply or not, to just think about what's most important to you and why. And I think just starting with that question and being really honest and writing, pretending like no one's ever going to read it, but it's just with you, I think is a really good first step in defining what your vision is for your life, for your career, and what those values are that align with that vision.
That's great.
yeah, that's a very similar path that I was going to take, like just understanding your convictions, you know, kind of assessing yourself and asking, like, what is it that gets me out of bed in the morning? What is it that I'm wanting to achieve in my life, you know, and not being bound by what you think is necessarily possible, you know, but just allowing yourself to really kind of break down those boundaries and challenge yourself. You know, if it's something that drives you, you know, something that is just such a deeply held conviction, and you're not quite sure, you know, how to get there, I think defining it is obviously the first step, and then reaching out to your community, figuring out who's doing what you think is important, and talking to them, making those kind of connections, and figuring out how to pave the way for yourself to be able to do that as well.
That's great. Y'all are giving me goosebumps, by the way.
I think for me, it's really just getting out of my comfort zone. I realized after many years of being in the same position at my nonprofit that it wasn't anything that was going on the outside. It was really me that was holding myself back because I was so scared to do things to move up. And so that's where my self-inventory comes in, where I'm like, well, what is it that I need to do to move up? No matter how scared I am, I need to work on that and just do it. And so part of that was being able to speak in front of people, articulate my ideas, and not be afraid of what others had to say against it or even for it. Just do it. I knew my job. I knew what needed to be done, so I needed to assert myself. And so I still work on that now. And through that, I joined like an organization to help me be able to speak in public and things like that. And so, it's a work in progress, but that's what I have to do, is get out of my comfort zone and just work towards that.
Is it Toastmasters, right?
Yes.
That's what you're doing?
Yeah.
That's awesome. It's a great self-improvement thing, everybody. I really considered joining it until I got this job, and I now have to speak in front of people all the time. So, pushing myself. So, let me see. I had a really good question here. Who's your role model as a leader?
You guys want to go ahead? There's so many. I'm
Yeah.
struggling to choose.
I know mine. So Chrystal and I worked together at Casa de Esperanza for many years, and my role model is actually Kathy Foster, who started Casa de Esperanza in 1982. She started out as a nun. She was a nun in like her teenage years. I think she became a nun, and she was working with the mentally ill and impoverished people of the greater Houston area, and saw that people, people were just having a really hard time. There wasn't anywhere safe for children to go when their parents were struggling with addiction and disease. And so she decided to start an organization that would house these children. At first she tried to house the mothers and children, and that didn't really pan out. So she just started focusing on creating a safe place for the kids to be able to go. And ultimately that turned into what it is today, 34 years later. Casa de Esperanza was the first agency to take HIV positive children back in the early to mid 80s, when people didn't understand what HIV and AIDS was, and they were very scared. And she just said, we're going to do this because they're people and they're vulnerable, and everybody deserves to be loved and to be safe. And I was inspired every day that I worked at Casa, because I felt that conviction, and I hoped to be able to be a leader like that one day.
That's awesome. How about you, Chrystal?
That was a hard question. There's a lot of leaders that I look up to, and I think one of them, and I always butcher her last name, but Malala, the Pakistani girl who advocates for education. I just thought that her story was just so empowering, and not just for the girls in her culture, but just worldwide. For her to stand up against everything that was thrown at her. She was they were trying to kill her for something she was so passionate about, but she pushed through. She survived, and she continued to advocate. And I think that just says a lot about her ability as a leader. And so I think of her when I think of a role model as a leader.
That's awesome. Good. Well, before we get to Twitter questions, I'm going to ask you two questions that I ask almost every person that I interview. So the first one is, what's a time that you have failed, either as a leader or just any time in your career that you've really learned from?
Well, I remember when I first started, when I went from being a teacher to working in the nonprofit sector. I had a meeting with my manager at the time, and I kind of laid out everything that was wrong with a project that I was working on. And I'll never forget being told to never approach your manager with just things that are going wrong, but also have a solution and recommendations and a path forward. And I think ever since then, I always make sure that whenever I speak with my manager, if there's, for every thing that I point out that is wrong, that I've thought very carefully about how to articulate a path forward. So I know that's not like a very specific example, but for me, that was a really important learning lesson that I think I'll carry on for the rest of my life.
That's great. How about you, Bonnie?
Yeah, I know I've had kind of a theme throughout all of my answers about like kind of this idea of teamwork, but for me, it's been a really important learning piece throughout my career because I've always been a very independent person, and I think one of the things I learned in my early years as a social worker in the nonprofit sector is that I cannot do everything on my own. And I think that I would try to accomplish all of these things on my own because I thought that in doing that I could control the outcome, and that if I could control the outcome, then everything would be perfect. And unfortunately, that's never true. Even if you do things correctly, things never turn out perfect. And so I think I just have learned that there is so much value in the process. There's so much value in utilizing people around you and learning from them because, I may decide that one way is the correct way to do something and I could be totally off base and utilizing the people around me and coming up with different avenues. It's just much more likely that things are going to work out the way that they should when you're not trying to do everything yourself.
Great points.
I think for me, it's been more of a personal kind of thing where I have to remember that it's not about me. So when things don't go my way or how I think they should have gone, it's not a personal attack against me. It's not about me at all. And so as a leader, I'm in my first year of, official leadership where I'm at. And it's been a really big learning curve because being in middle management, it's like you're stuck in the middle, and you have to kind of play this game where you're attentive to those who are working under you, but you're also having to answer to those above you, and then it's like you can't please everybody. So really, just taking a step back and just looking at the bigger picture. Just because if you internalize everything, you're not going to make it.
Right. That's awesome. So the last question that I like to ask most folks that we interview is, we have a number of students who have expressed an interest in starting their own nonprofit. And in Houston, we have about 15,000 nonprofits. And so I always ask, what do you think about that? What do you think about starting your own nonprofit?
Well, I think if there's a cause that you're really passionate about, I think the first question would be, is there someone who's already doing that? And if there is, then my second question would be, is that an organization I could work for? Because I think that there is a lot of times a lot of duplication of efforts, and there is a need for us to kind of work smarter together. Now, whether you decide, yes, but I still want to attack this issue from a certain angle, or if no one is doing that type of work, I think that's great. I think it stretches your leadership in a lot of different ways. So if you're starting your own nonprofit, the first thing you have to do is you have to be able to articulate a vision, a compelling story for people. You have to be able to fundraise. You have to be able to build and manage a team and just build an organization from the ground up. So I just think, there's no clear-cut answer, but there's a rigorous thinking process that I think needs to go behind that.
Yeah, you stole the words right out of my mouth. I think that if you, if you're passionate about a certain area, a certain demographic or population, and there are no organizations doing what you want to do, then I think for sure, look into that. But it is a lot of work. It's not something to take on lightly. But I think if there are organizations already doing what you're passionate about, already filling this need, then joining forces makes a lot more sense. Because people need resources, and if you're combining efforts with other people who have like-minded ideas and convictions, then you're more likely to go further, rather than spreading yourself thin and spreading your resources thin and having to fundraise for different organizations doing the same things. You can collaborate those efforts and seek after, funding together, and it just seems like your resources would go further in that way.
What do you think, Chrystal?
I think it would be very hard to start a nonprofit from scratch. But I mean, if you are that passionate and you want to, have the drive to do it, then do it. I mean, Kathy Foster did 34 years ago, and we're still
probably weren't 15,000 nonprofits.
Right.
Even when we were in school, there were only 10, and that was like 10,000. And that was like 4 years ago. But I'll say y'all are the first people who said anything near yes, maybe. Most people are like flat out, no, there's already an organization doing it. Or if there's one doing some similar work, maybe they would be willing to, take on your idea.
Right. I always feel like there are a lot of organizations doing similar stuff, but just kind of being in the trenches when we're like, oh, we wish that we had a resource for this particular client in this particular area. I mean, I think there's always room for something else.
Yeah, and I think also, at least for CASA, because that's where most of my experience was at the agency where Chrystal works, it's small enough to where, you like the whole agency is very hands-on with every child that comes through. And so the idea of making it so big that it's serving all of the children in the greater Houston area just seems very daunting, and it doesn't seem like it would be able to make the kind of impact that it makes on every child that comes through the doors. And so I could see, if someone was inspired by what CASA is doing, starting another agency that is modeled after it, I could see that being wonderful. So, I don't know.
Those are very good points.
Yeah.
I like the diversity of opinions. I'm sure our students do too, especially those that want to start nonprofits. So we have a lot of questions on Twitter here. Thank y'all for being so engaged. But first, the one I want to go to first is from Hazel. And so not all of y'all have to answer these, just if you want to, feel free to answer. Do you manage staff? And if so, how would they describe you? And this could be in your previous role, since I am one of the staff you manage, so.
I don't have to answer this question.
Well, I think it's really important, whether you manage staff or not, to always do some sort of 360 type of survey or leadership review. So I think it's really important to always, and it's probably not best coming from you, but from someone in the organization, to share an anonymous survey with the partners that you're working with or with the staff that you're managing, to provide feedback, both positive and constructive, on your leadership skills. So I guess from those surveys that I have read in the past, I think that one thing that I've always have seen was maybe respectful, humility and respect. That's something that I think is really important, and I try to emulate. An area of growth would be speaking up. So speaking up in meetings and making sure that I'm bold enough to kind of share my ideas, because sometimes it is really scary, and that's an area where I have to push myself to speak up, and other people have told me that as well.
Okay.
I do not manage staff.
I manage one person. But it has been a growing experience for me, because coming from not managing anyone to being someone's supervisor, it's really different in regards to delegating. That has been very hard for me, delegating, because I'm just used to just doing it myself. And so as a manager, I've had to really learn to just let go and say, okay, this is your job and this is what you do, instead of just doing it myself, or feeling bad that they might have too much on their load, and just taking it upon myself without discussing it. So that's something that I've had to kind of work on.
Yeah. No, that's a really good lesson. You can't make assumptions about other people's workloads, other people's priorities, if you don't talk about it first. So Kawana Mays, one of our students, asked, do you have any advice for someone transitioning into the nonprofit sector at an entry level?
Transitioning into nonprofit?
Mm-hmm. We have some students who are currently in nonprofits. We have some students who are, in private sector jobs, or maybe at, a school.
There's so much.
Yeah, I've been in nonprofit my whole life, so I don't even really.
Well, when you were a beginner, what helped you?
Well, I guess it just, things were so crazy. It's not as structured as I guess you would in corporate America. And so I've just gotten used to it. But I guess if you are coming from a place that's more structured and then going into nonprofit, that's something you would probably have to just kind of get used to really fast. Mm-hmm. Because, it's just kind of, and also depending on the type of agency you're at, it's just always go, 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 whatever. So
I think for me, something that is a little bit different working in the nonprofit sector is that a lot of times you are your funding makes a big difference in what you're able to do, and it can restrict you at times or push you in a certain direction, and that can be kind of frustrating. And it's definitely, or it can be super empowering. It just depends. I have, I guess, had it be both in my career in nonprofit, but it's definitely something that's different. Just wherever your funding sources are, they're expecting certain numbers and certain statistics and so forth, and so you might be pushed in a direction that maybe you didn't think would be what you were doing, but for this quarter or this season or whatever, you're having to do that. And then I think also in nonprofit is that I think starting out, you have to be willing to work really hard. You just have to be willing to work long hours, and a lot of times it's thankless, and it feels like it's never going to end, or things are never going to resolve, and you have to be okay with that, because a lot of times you don't get to see the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. But I think once again, that's where it's helpful to have good people around you that are working toward the same goals, and that you can encourage each other and be encouraged by each other, because a lot of times the clients won't thank you, and a lot of times your management team might not thank you, or may not even see what you're doing, and I think that you have to be willing to make those sort of sacrifices in order to have any sort of longevity in the nonprofit sector.
Yeah, I would add to be flexible and patient. Yeah. So in the nonprofit world, you will wear a lot of different hats. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of opportunity for leadership. And so there are times where I have found myself planning events, ordering food, answering calls, building strategy, very different things that just need to get done. Mm-hmm. And I think just kind of always just keep a positive attitude. And I would say something that's really important for me is that I try to make sure that I'm always leading a project that has purpose and that challenges the higher level thinking inside of me. Because if 1/3 of my job is doing coordination tasks, I just need to make sure that I'm always doing something that's purposeful. And so that's where the self-advocacy comes into play as well.
That's a good point.
All good points, yeah. I think something too that like y'all touched on is kind of the nature of nonprofits and how funding is a really big driver, can be depending on leadership decisions, can be a big driver in your activities. But also I think the political climate is, whether it's you're providing a service that is, you are part of the safety net. So many nonprofits are part of the safety net, and there's never enough money to help all the people who need it and all the vulnerable populations. So if somebody comes into power who ends up cutting back on some funds, public funds, or adding to public funds, I mean, it changes your strategy and like the needs of the community. So I would say that's another thing. And then let's see. Let's see what else people ask. Christopher Gilbert asks, what has been your greatest learning experience? And we also have some lessons learned. I know y'all have touched on a few things, but is there anything else you would add differently as your greatest learning experience?
So I would say always try to find ways to capture your impact. So especially in the nonprofit world, and now in the age of there's data for everything, funders and investors want to know what is the return on investment and what was the impact of your program. And there are a lot of different ways that you can kind of capture that, even if the perfect data doesn't exist.
Nice.
I think my greatest lesson learned is that if I truly care deeply about something, I'm willing to work very, very hard. And so I found that, doing this kind of work, like I have to be passionate. I have to be convicted. I have to be driven by those things. And when I am, I feel like I can do much more than I ever thought I could do. A lot of times I'm not working, 9 to 5 Monday through Friday. It's after hours, it's calls in the middle of the night, it's, caring for people in very vulnerable situations, and I have to care about what I'm doing or it's not going to be meaningful. And I just find that, I can imagine that most people going into the nonprofit world are going to be doing things that are meaningful to them. But I just think that if you're going to take this leap, if this is what you're going to do, you really have to know what you're passionate about, and you have to be encouraged by those convictions every day.
Great.
Yeah, I would go along the same lines as Bonnie. You have to know that this is what you want to do. It's not about the money, because in nonprofit there's not a whole lot of it. And so you're here for a reason. And so just to remember that reason, especially over the years when, it just kind of seems like you're just kind of in the same spot, or, things aren't changing or whatever, you remember why you went in the first place, and that'll help you get through.
Those are great, guys. We have another question from Abe Perez. How do you deal with team members that do not pull their own weight on team projects? Always a good question. Challenges. Yeah. That's an option.
I think the first thing is to always set an example for the type of expectation that you have for others. I think the second thing is have clear expectations, have a clear vision, identify what are some ways in which you can support your colleagues or the team that you're managing. On a very technical level, if you're going to be an executive director or you're going to be manage a team, know what is the organization's protocol for dealing with employees who maybe are not meeting those expectations. So I think it's all of the above.
If your organization has a protocol. A lot of nonprofits are not run as organizations or as businesses, so.
That's correct.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, obviously those are excellent points. I think that, in that I haven't really worked for an organization that sets those sort of standards. I think I think, you know, I jokingly said you just suck it up, but I think, you know, honestly, you have to be willing to say, okay, this needs to get done. And if that means that I have to do more than I initially anticipated, then I'm going to do more than I initially anticipated. But I think, yeah, setting an example, and I think also because I'm a clinician also, you know, I do a lot of therapeutic work. And so I feel like if someone isn't pulling their weight, I would probably sit down with them and ask them, you know, like have like a heart to heart, like, okay, what's going on? You know, is there something I can support you with? You know, this is kind of the expectation I had for this project. I feel like we're not really eye to eye on this. Let's talk about it and work it out. Like, that's just how I am. I tend to just meet things where they are instead of letting them fester and grow resentful, because that can definitely happen. And I don't like to live in that place. I'd rather just face it head on. And if they're just going to say to my face, I don't want to do it, then, you know, okay, then that's where we're going to go from, you know. But I think, you know, talking it out, being open, communicating, those things are all just incredibly important.
I like that. And it sounds like a very kind of your approach is being, you know, being there and being having empathy for the other person, and like no judgments about, oh, they're not doing this, they must not like me. They're not doing this, they're not good at their job. They're not doing this, they like, you know, suck or whatever. But really it's, they are not doing this. Maybe they're having a tough time at home. Maybe they have a sick family member. Maybe their dog died. Like, there are a million other things in the world that have nothing to do with your job that, you know, affect your job performance.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Or your grad school performance.
Right.
Like we all experienced.
That's where Suck It Up came into play. What about you, Chrystal?
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of approaching it as in, you know, what's going on, let's talk about it. As a team leader, you know, we have a pretty tight-knit team, and we have a lot of things that we have to get done. And so if somebody drops the ball, then we have to kind of figure out, well, why, what's going on, let's fix this. And so what I've seen that works in the past is sitting together as a group and talking it out as a group has been able to help. The individual talks are okay, but when there are different dynamics within the group, it's just easier to kind of to bring everybody together, let's hash it out, and then let's do our job.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And it reminds me of something that we've talked on you know, in this class about is 16personalities.org. Have any of y'all done this?
Yes.
The Myers-Briggs test. And it takes 16 minutes, and it tells you like how you work, how you are in relationships and with family, and how you'll be as a parent. And it's like creepy how precise it is. So like so many people at Children at Risk have taken it, and we all know each other's acronyms. Like we can better approach people when things aren't going
Is this like
perfectly
an
well.
extrovert?
Right, yeah.
Yeah, kind of, and it's like 4 different categories.
Yeah, we
So.
did that on our team too.
Was it helpful?
It was very helpful, and
Good.
especially when we looked at, you know, our work dynamic with each other and how people worked and how they responded to other. It was very, very helpful.
Right. Yeah, that's good. It's also a good self-inventory tool, actually. So let's take one more question from, let's go to the top and see if we have any new questions. Let's see. What's a good resource for locating or organizations that might already be doing the work you want to accomplish? So these are for our students who might want to start their own nonprofit.
What's that? Oh, I'm really bad at this.
I'm going to start off with one. How about the United Way? Calling them up,
yeah.
acting like you need this resource, and ask them if they know of it or a similar resource, and they will tell you. So what's that, 211?
311.
311. 211 is City of Houston Information, and 311 is United Way.
Yeah.
What's the organization that like rates nonprofits?
GuideStar.
GuideStar. That one.
That's a good one too.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Any other?
I mean, I guess in education, you could look at big coalitions, go to their website, and you can see a lot of nonprofits that are aligned to that. So
Is it called Big Coalition?
no, it's not called big. So Early Matters Houston
Oh, okay.
would be one example. Here, they have over 80 partners. So that's a good starting point right there. If education is of interest, I'm sure there are other coalition groups for different areas.
Very true. I know there's one in the near north side. I think too, you could, if you have an idea of what you want to do in any sort of sector, I mean, maybe it's food insecurity, call up the Houston Food Bank. Go and meet with someone, meet with their community person, their outreach person. First of all, people love to talk about themselves and the work they do, I promise. And so they will have coffee with you. They will take 20 minutes at their office for you to go and pick their brain. And when you're a student, it's the prime time in your life because nobody will say no to a student. I'll guarantee that. So, and if you need help or introductions or anything, email me, and I'm happy to also facilitate that if you're having problems. But I think that that's an easy way to just talk to people because people within the industry will know resources available within that certain sector. So that's about all we have time for here today. Are there any parting words of wisdom you would like our students to know?
I think I would just say, always stay positive. It's really hard work, as all of us have mentioned. There is no such thing as a perfect nonprofit organization, any organization for that matter. And so I think we always face a choice of being negative, being positive, and if you're going to be constructive, articulate a path forward.
I like it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, nonprofit work is passionate work. You are going to get angry and fired up, and I think, being able to maintain that everybody within your organization, is working toward the same goal. You might have different ways of getting there, but maintaining kind of, the positive attitude, the ability to get back down to the core of the matter and know that, that you're still moving in that direction, I think is just, you have to be able to maintain hope, and which can be a hard thing to do sometimes, but I think that is definitely what spurs me forward.
That's great. Anything you'd add, Chrystal?
I would just say that in regards to leadership, just to remember that leadership is a continuous effort. You're always growing in it. You're never, oh, I'm a leader now, and that's, you're always growing as a leader. And so just to remember that there's always room for growth.
That's awesome. Well, thank you all so much for being here today. I think this is one of the best classes we've had yet, and so I think students will have learned a lot from it, so I appreciate it. All right, folks, until next time. I actually think next week you might have a video, so check, yes, you will, because Dr. Sanborn and I will be in the Rio Grande Valley with the other version of this class that is taking a trip there for a week. So we will miss you, but we hope you enjoy the video next week. Thank you so much for tuning in.